Dan Marino, one of the most skilled quarterbacks in NFL history, had a dominating career, broke many records, had a great arm with a lightning quick release, and spearheaded one of the greatest offenses during the 80s, capping off with having one of the greatest seasons by a quarterback ever. You can make a pretty good argument that Marino was the best player of his draft that year. When you look at the stats between him along with other Hall of Fame QBs during the 1983 draft, you really can't compare. Achievements, accolades, stats, throwing ability, he has it all. Even skill-wise, personally, I believe he was much more than Elway or Kelly, and certainly beats out Troy Aikman, even having seasons better than Joe Montana multiple times. But when we all, well, most people think about the career of Dan Marino, one thing outshines everything else. No, it was not his quick release, not the crazy seasons, and not the talent. It was the fact that he never won a ring. And not only that, he only made it to one Super Bowl. Despite the skill or the awards, he could never get over the hump. And oftentimes he fell short, failing every single time in the postseason. Sure, there were outside factors, but the point still stands. With multiple playoff blunders and even the infamous last game of his career. His problems with the front office, the multiple head coaches, and even the fans in Miami, starting off with a bright future to ending in sheer embarrassment. On one hand, Marino had a successful career. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. But when looking at the big picture and the overall main objective of any NFL team, that objective being to win championships, how would not achieving that final objective affect your legacy? With that question asked, is Dan Marino a failure? Does he leave a legacy of failure? Well, in a way, he does. So let's have a look into his career. Let's begin. This is Dan Marino, a legacy of failure. Looking at an overview of his career, statistically, he was spectacular, but we need to start at the very beginning in 1983, where he was selected 24th in the draft by the Miami Dolphins. Now, usually quarterbacks do not like being picked so low in the first round, especially with a well-established talent like Marino was. However, this would be a blessing in disguise, because usually the lower the draft pick, the better the team is. And in 1982, the Dolphins were a promising team that had one of the best defenses in the league and a top 10 offense. They made the Super Bowl that year before losing to the then Washington Redskins. They were essentially one core piece away from a championship, and in 1983, the Dolphins took their chance and drafted Marino, but he did not get his start right away with the team. They wanted to give their other quarterback, David Woodley, a chance, but after falling to a 3-2 record, the change was made, and Marino hit the ground off running, throwing for 20 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. He brought the Dolphins back to the playoffs. They ended the year with a 12-4 record, but losing in a heartbreaking divisional round against the Seahawks. Despite the first round exit, the Dolphins were excited. They really have a great team, led by Dan Marino and his two favorite targets, Mark Duper and Mark Clayton. They were ready to take off, and oh boy, they took off. With 48 touchdowns, over 5,000 yards, and capping it off with a 14-2 record and cruising through the playoffs and making it to the final challenge, the 49ers. Now, funny enough, despite the 14-2 record, they were actually not considered the best team in the NFL. The 49ers were, as they had a 15-1 record and were establishing themselves as the NFL superpower. So to say Marino and the Dolphins had a challenge was a massive understatement. And the challenge showed in the Super Bowl, as the Dolphins could not hang with the Niners at all and later got blown out 16-38. So now his best season got ended by Joe Montana and the 49ers, but it's fine. Marino would be in his third season, so he has tons of opportunities, right? Well, in 1985, he still managed a good season and held a 12-4 record. Their biggest feat was being the then undefeated 85 Bears team and giving them their only loss of the season. And in the playoffs, things looked good initially. They beat the Browns in a really close game and made it to the conference championship, where they were decimated by the Patriots. This potential opportunity was a huge miss for the Dolphins, because if they won, they would have played the Bears in the Super Bowl, and they already bested them before, and they had a good shot to beat them again in the Super Bowl. So this was a major miss here. In 1986, things got a lot worse, and their season can be best described as their first game against the Chargers, as they got blown out by the Chargers. It was awful. The first week of the season left a bad taste in fans' mouths, and honestly, Marino is not to blame here, as if you look at the numbers, he had his second best season in his career and was leading the #1 offense in the league, but the defense was just horrible. This would be a common theme for Marino, as the front office was not giving the defense support he needed in order to win games, often having to pick up the slack made by the defense. This lack of success became a thing for the rest of the 80s, as not only they missed the playoffs in 86, but also in 87, 88, and 89, while Marino is still putting up good numbers. However, in 1990, the change was made, with head coach Dan Marino making changes on the offensive line and the defense. The 90s was one of the most competitive eras in pro football because there was so many powerhouses during this time. The Cowboys in their doomsday defense with the triplets, the 49ers with the new Steve Young and Jerry Rice, and the Giants with Lawrence Taylor were making some noise, and the Buffalo Bills. They had all their pieces and were a more completed team despite the changes Miami made. But honestly, this was his last chance because during the 90s, he was already in his 30s and his time was running out. He had to take a chance and get over the hump. But the Bills stood in their way as they beat Marino's Dolphins 44-34 in the AFC Championship game. Missed the playoffs in 91, made it back to the championship game in 92, only to be destroyed by the Bills again. Marino suffered an Achilles tear and missed most of the 93 season, and in 1994, they missed a 48-yard game-winning field goal and lost to the Chargers in the divisional round. The Dolphins met the Bills again in the wildcard game in 1995, where the Bills just took apart the Dolphins' run game, and Marino, although having 400 yards and 2 touchdowns, still threw 3 interceptions in the loss again. But this loss was the beginning of the end. By this point, things got so much worse. Dan Marino shockingly retired shortly after the loss, and Dan Marino would have his final Pro Bowl season of his career. Both Marks brothers leave the team, and Miami is now in shambles, looking for a way out. So they hire legendary head coach Jimmy Johnson. He had a plan to build a dominant run game and let an aging Marino back it up, and build a much better overall defense. Sound familiar? This plan by Johnson failed, as they missed the playoffs in 96 and only scored 3 points in their wildcard loss against the Patriots in 1997. At this point, disappointing season after disappointing season, Jimmy Johnson was on the hot seat. He had to make something happen, and his relationship with Dan Marino completely fell off, and they were at each other's necks. This was stirred due to Shula limiting Dan Marino's play calling, which created a trust issue. Thus, the divide began. Fortunately for the two, they found a little success during the 1998 season. They went 10-6 and had one of the best defenses in the league that year, and they even got a playoff win against the Bills in the wildcard round. But they later got whooped by the eventual Super Bowl champion Denver Broncos in the divisional round, so it ended in misery. But now it's 1999. Marino is 38 years old and has a season riddled with injuries and inconsistent play. He was on his final leg with barely squeezing into the playoffs with a 9-7 record. Everybody, this is the final chance for him to get a ring he has been chasing for over a decade and a half, and it started in a divisional round matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail with this because Secret Base already made a great segment about this and went into great play-by-play detail about it, so I'll link it in the description down below. It was really good, but to keep it short, the Dolphins got blown out. Bad. The Jaguars put up a shocking 62 points when the game was over, and the Dolphins put up only 7. This was the most ugly playoff loss I've ever seen, and the fans thought so as they urged Marino to retire, and Jimmy Johnson retired soon after the game, and Marino retired a few months later in 2000, ending the career off in one of the worst ways possible. So it's over. After consistent greatness for multiple seasons, he failed to get a ring, which haunts many great players' legacy, and Dan Marino is no different here. He is often put under many quarterbacks despite putting up better numbers and stats simply because he could not win a ring. But does this make him a failure, or do I think he's a failure? Well, no, I don't. His numbers and achievements tell me he is not, and his talent is undeniable. But overall, he was on a one-dimensional team for a good portion of his prime career. Just about every year with the team from 1983 to 1989, the Dolphins were considered the best offensive football. When it was all said and done, he threw for over 60,000 yards and over 400 touchdowns, which is insane and admirable. I would go as far to say he is easily a top QB ever. sure. But I can't lie, the first thing when I think of when I look back at Dan Marino's career, it's laced with failure. Now, was it all his fault? Well, no. But to not say he was never at fault would be pretty disingenuous. There were even moments where Dan Marino was simply outplayed multiple times. These times being in the Super Bowl where Joe Montana and the 49ers were just flat out better. And during those battles with the Bills in the 90s, most of the time Jim Kelly was flat out better, as most of the time he performed better. But overall, I think that if the Dolphins were not so tight with their wallets during Marino's prime, then they would have had a much better chance of actually getting to another Super Bowl and maybe actually winning 1 or 2. But we'll never know. And when it's all said and done, I can describe Dan Marino to be the best to never do it. Thank you for tuning in.